He walked into the courtroom to close a multi-million-dollar deal. He walked out holding the hand of a 6-year-old boy with no home, no family, and a paper bag lunch. David Langley didn't believe in detours until one small voice on a bench changed everything. What started as a routine appearance became the beginning of a bond neither of them saw coming. This isn't a story about business. It's about belonging, second chances, and what happens when you stop walking past the ones who wait. Because sometimes forever begins with a simple choice to stay. The courtroom wasn't new to him. In fact, David Langley had spent most of his adult life in places just like it: polished wood benches, raised platforms, the stale air of power being shuffled and signed into motion. For a man like him, courtrooms were places of leverage, negotiation, consequence. His entire empire had passed through them at one point or another. Mergers, lawsuits, high-stakes deals sealed with handshakes that cost more than most people would earn in a lifetime. That morning, he'd come for one reason: to finalize an acquisition. A small tech company with potential, buried under poor management. His lawyers had prepped every document. The opposing counsel had been outmaneuvered weeks ago. All that remained was the judge's signature and a ceremonial appearance that would look good in the business press. He didn't expect a delay. He certainly didn't expect a child. David had arrived 20 minutes early, because he always did. His assistant trailed behind him, phone in hand, rattling off calendar items and email updates he wasn't really listening to. His focus was on the hearing room down the hall where the deal would be finalized. But outside that very room, on a bench against the wall, sat a small boy, alone, feet swinging off the edge, a paper bag clutched in one hand, a crumpled sheet of paper in the other. He couldn't have been older than 6. His shoes were scuffed, his coat was too big, but his eyes, that was what made David stop walking, wide and watchful, not scared, but used to being overlooked. "Excuse me," David said to his assistant. "Give me a minute." She looked confused but nodded. He stepped toward the bench. The boy looked up but didn't speak. "Waiting for someone?" David asked. The boy blinked. "Sort of." David crouched. "What's your name?" "Leo." "Nice to meet you, Leo. I'm David." The boy nodded, polite. "I have to stay here until the man with the papers comes back." David glanced at the sheet of paper in his hand. It was a printout, legal language, creased and stained with what looked like juice. At the top, in bold, temporary guardianship hearing. David's stomach turned. "Is someone in there with you?" Leo shook his head. "My caseworker had another kid to take. She said someone else would come for me soon." David looked down the hall. No one, just security and a clerk who barely glanced their way. He sat beside Leo. "You hungry?" Leo looked at the bag. "I have crackers. It's okay." David didn't know why he stayed. He had no obligation, no connection. But something about the boy's steadiness, how he didn't whimper or fidget, how he just sat there waiting like he had done it too many times, made David feel like walking away would break something sacred. A few minutes passed. Then the courtroom door opened. A woman in a dark suit emerged, calling over her shoulder to someone still inside. She looked up, surprised to see David on the bench. "Mr. Langley?" "Yes," he said, standing. "This is your courtroom?" "Yes, we're finishing up a custody hearing. Your matter's next." David looked at Leo. "And him?" She sighed. "That's the case. His placement fell through this morning. We're trying to figure it out." David turned back to the boy. "Do you know where they're sending you?" Leo shrugged. "They said maybe a house with a lady, but no one knows for sure." The lawyer looked uneasy. "I'm sorry you had to be here for this. We'll clear the room shortly." But David didn't move. "Can I sit in?" The woman blinked. "You want to observe?" "Yes." She hesitated. "Technically, yes. It's open court." So he sat in the back, still in his tailored suit, the weight of his company on his shoulders. He watched as a judge read off a list of placement failures, as a new social worker admitted they had no local beds, as someone on the state side suggested emergency care. Temporary, just for a few days. Leo sat in the corner, quiet, folding his paper bag with care. The hearing lasted 15 minutes. When it ended, no one clapped, no one smiled. The judge looked tired. The lawyers looked resigned. David stood slowly, walked up to the bench. "Your Honor," he said, "may I speak?" Everyone turned. "Mr. Langley," the judge said cautiously, "this is not your matter." "I understand," David said, but I'd like to make a request." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Go on." David looked at Leo. "I'd like to file for temporary guardianship." A hush fell over the room. The social worker stepped forward. "You're not in our system." "No," David said, "but I have the means, the space, and the time. And it's clear the alternative isn't ready." The judge leaned forward. "You understand what you're saying?" "I do." Leo stared at him, unblinking. Paperwork was pulled. Background checks were mentioned. David called his lawyer, who arrived within 20 minutes. An emergency hearing was opened. By the end of the hour, David walked out of that courtroom not as a man who had finalized a deal, but as a man holding a child's hand. Leo didn't say much, just looked up at him and said, "Do you know how to cook?" David blinked. "No." Leo nodded. "That's okay. I do." They drove in silence to David's house, too large, too empty, with corners that hadn't been filled in years. Leo didn't ask for a tour. He asked for a blanket. Then he fell asleep on the couch, curled against a throw pillow, the kind David used to buy in bulk without noticing their color. David sat nearby, staring at a contract he hadn't signed. He didn't open his laptop. He didn't call the office. Instead, he stayed. And when Leo woke an hour later, rubbing sleep from his eyes, he asked, "Is this a forever?" David didn't know yet, but he said, "It's a right now, and sometimes that's how forever begins." The next morning, David woke up earlier than usual, not because of an alarm, but because of the quiet. The kind that didn't feel empty, but different, full. He walked down the stairs barefoot, still adjusting to the idea that someone else was in his home. The house, once echoing with silence and glass, now held a blanket on the floor, a cup half full of water, a pair of tiny shoes by the door that hadn't been there yesterday. Leo was already awake. He sat at the kitchen counter, legs swinging, quietly eating dry cereal from a bowl he'd pulled down himself. He wore one of David's T-shirts, rolled and knotted at the back to keep it from swallowing him whole. David stood in the doorway, unsure whether to speak. Leo noticed him and gave a short nod. "I couldn't find the spoon, so I used a measuring cup." David cleared his throat. "That works." Leo crunched slowly, then looked up. "Do I go to school today?" "No," David said. "Not yet. We have to sort out the paperwork. Until then, you can stay here." Leo nodded. "Do you have Wi-Fi?" David blinked. "Yes." Leo gave a small smile. "Cool." Later that day, David called in favors. Lawyers, therapists, placement officers. His assistant, at first stunned, quickly became indispensable, reworking his calendar, canceling travel, rerouting everything that didn't include the word Leo. They set up a room, soft bedding, a desk, bookshelves, the works. Leo watched all of it without much reaction, except to point at one piece of art David tried to hang and mutter, "That one looks like a mistake." David laughed. "Fair enough." That night, after dinner, boxed mac and cheese with cut-up strawberries, Leo insisted on washing himself. They sat in the living room in a silence that didn't need filling. Leo held a book in his lap. He wasn't reading it, just touching the cover, like it might tell him something. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "My mom used to draw stars on my hand before school, so I'd know someone wanted me to come back." David didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to this kind of vulnerability, raw, quiet, unfiltered. So he just nodded. "That's beautiful." Leo looked up. "Do you have a marker?" David stood and returned with one. He handed it over. Leo uncapped it and took David's hand. Then, carefully, he drew a star in the center of his palm. Not perfect, a little wobbly, but unmistakable. There, Leo said. Now you know, too. David stared at the mark for a long time. He didn't wash it off. 3 days passed, then a week. The court granted extended temporary guardianship while the placement search was paused. Leo stayed. He learned the names of every plant in the house, labeled them with sticky notes, named the tall ficus near the staircase Gerald. He took to eating meals in the sunroom where the light hit just right and he could see the tops of trees. He started sleeping through the night. One afternoon, as David returned from a call, he found Leo sitting at the kitchen island, sketching. "What's that?" David asked. Leo turned the paper. It was a drawing of a tall man holding a kid's hand. They stood outside a large building with columns and a flag. "The courtroom?" David asked. Leo nodded. The caption underneath said, "He went in for a deal, but I think he found me instead." David felt his chest tighten. He sat beside Leo. "I didn't expect any of this," he said honestly. Leo shrugged. "Me either." Another beat passed. Then Leo said, "Can I stay?" David looked at him. "Do you want to?" Leo nodded. "More than anything." David didn't rush the answer. He didn't need to. "I'm working on it," he said. "But yes, that's the plan." Leo grinned. "Then we should go buy more cereal." That weekend they went to the park, then the bookstore, then the shelter where Leo had once stayed, to drop off a box of toys and notes Leo had written himself. Each note said, "You're not lost. Someone is already looking for you." Back home, as the sun dipped below the windows and the house glowed amber with soft light, David stood at the threshold of Leo's room and watched him sleep. One leg poked out from under the blanket. His fingers still curled around the stuffed dog David had won for him from a claw machine at the grocery store. On the nightstand was the original paper from the courtroom, the guardianship filing. Folded, neat. Taped to it now was a post-it note in a child's handwriting. "Let's keep this one." David whispered, "Yeah, kid, I think we will." And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man who'd walked out of a courtroom with more leverage or a stronger position. He felt like a man who had finally walked into his life. 2 weeks later, the court scheduled a follow-up hearing. Just routine, they said. A procedural check-in. But to David, it felt like something bigger. Not quite an ending, not yet, but a moment where the world paused long enough to ask, "Are you still sure?" He was. That morning, he dressed in a charcoal suit, nothing flashy, nothing showy. Leo insisted on wearing a shirt with buttons, but paired it with sneakers that lit up when he walked. David didn't argue. The shoes had become a kind of statement, like Leo was saying, "I'm still a kid, no matter how many papers you put my name on." The drive to the courthouse was quiet, not tense, just still. Leo watched out the window, narrating the passing buildings in a whisper. "That one has a green roof. That one looks like a face. That one probably smells weird inside." David smiled without looking. "You ready for this?" Leo nodded. "I brought the drawing." He held it up, the one from the kitchen table, the sketch of them outside the courthouse captioned in blue marker. "He went in for a deal. But I think he found me in instead." They arrived early. David always did. The hallway outside the courtroom looked exactly the same. Beige walls, dull lights, benches that didn't invite comfort. But it didn't feel like it had the first time. This time, David wasn't there for leverage. This time, he wasn't walking in alone. Leo sat beside him on the bench, swinging his legs. "Do you think they'll ask me questions?" "Maybe, but you don't have to answer anything you don't want to." Leo thought about that, then said, "I want to tell them about Gerald." David blinked. "The ficus?" Leo grinned. "Yeah, and how he's still alive. That should count for something." David laughed, the kind of laugh he hadn't made in years, unprotected, full. When they were called in, the judge was the same one from their first hearing. She looked over the files, then over the rims of her glasses at Leo. "You're growing," she said. Leo nodded. "I eat cereal and breathe a lot." The courtroom chuckled gently. The judge turned to David. Mr. Langley, I see you've met all conditions. Completed home inspections, background checks. You've also provided a detailed affidavit describing your intentions for continued guardianship. David nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Anything else you'd like to add today? David looked down at Leo, who gave a tiny thumbs up beneath the table. I came here for a deal, David said slowly, but I left with a responsibility I didn't expect, and a kind of love I didn't know I was missing. I don't just want to continue this guardianship, I want to make it permanent. I want to adopt him. The courtroom went quiet. The judge blinked, then smiled. I see. She turned to Leo. Young man, what do you think about all this? Leo stood, not nervously, with intent. I think the first time I saw him, he looked too busy to see a kid, Leo said. But he did, and then he didn't leave, even when it got hard. He pulled out the drawing, held it up for the court. I want to stay, if he wants to keep me. David's throat tightened. I do, he said, voice hoarse. More than anything. The judge reviewed the final document, flipped through the last few pages, and said the words David would carry with him forever. Let the record reflect that guardianship is hereby transitioned to full legal adoption. The gavel fell. Leo turned to David. Does this mean we can get matching pajamas now? David laughed, eyes wet. Yeah, buddy, it does. They walked out of the courtroom hand in hand, not because they needed to, because they wanted to. Outside, the sun was warm on their faces. A reporter waiting for a different case recognized David and tried to ask about the merger he'd once come for. David held up a hand. No comment today. Then he looked down at Leo. Except maybe one. He faced the reporter. I came in for a deal, he said, and left with a son. That's all the headline I need. That night, back at home, Leo taped the court papers to the wall above his bed right next to a new drawing. It was the two of them, holding hands. Gerald the ficus standing beside them like a tree that had finally taken root. And underneath it, in Leo's handwriting, we didn't just sign papers, we signed up for each other. And for once, David didn't feel like a man who'd closed a deal. He felt like one who'd opened a door, one that wouldn't close again. The next morning, David woke up to the sound of footsteps, barefoot, uneven, small. He rolled over to see his bedroom door already cracked open and Leo standing in the hallway holding 2 mugs of something sloshing dangerously over the rims. I made coffee, Leo announced. One for you, one for me. Mine has more milk. David sat up, startled. You're not supposed to use the coffee pot. I didn't, Leo said proudly. I used the microwave. It tastes kind of like cereal water. David took the mug and sniffed. It smelled vaguely like hot chocolate and determination. They sat on the back porch with the mugs, watching the sun crawl up over the trees. Gerald the ficus had been moved outside for fresh air and spiritual growth, according to Leo. The plant leaned slightly to the left now, like it was trying to join the conversation. Leo blew into his mug. Do we still go to court again, or is that it? That's it, David said. You're mine now, for good. Leo was quiet for a moment. Feels weird to say it out loud. David nodded. Yeah, but it feels good too. Leo looked up at him. Do you think I'll change? In what way? Now that I don't know, picked. David turned to him. You've already changed, but not because you were picked. You changed because you let yourself stay. Leo took a slow sip of his mug. Yeah, I think I used to always be ready to run. I know, David said softly. So did I. They didn't speak for a long time. Later that day, they sat at the kitchen table with an adoption certificate propped between them. It wasn't framed yet. Leo had insisted on drawing on the back of it first. He was halfway through a sketch of a rocket ship. This is us, he said, going somewhere new. Where are we headed? Leo grinned. Doesn't matter, as long as it's together. The days that followed were simple, soft, full of the kind of moments no one would write headlines about. David showed Leo how to fix a dripping faucet. Leo taught David how to make pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. They started a wall calendar together, marking small wins with stickers. Brushed teeth without being asked, helped with groceries, did not microwave anything weird. Every time Leo passed the framed certificate on the hallway wall, he tapped it with his fingers, like it was proof, like it anchored something inside him. One night, after a movie and an impromptu living room pillow fort, Leo turned serious. "Do you think my mom would be okay with this?" David blinked. "What do you mean?" "I don't mean okay, like not mad. I mean okay like, would she be proud? Of me? Of you?" David felt the weight of the question settle. "I think," he said slowly, "she'd be proud that you kept going, that you let someone love you, that you turned pain into something strong." Leo nodded. "And what about your parents?" "They'd be surprised," David said. "But I think they'd see I finally made something real." Leo leaned against him. "You're not very good at popcorn, but you're pretty good at being a dad." David smiled. "I'll take that." As summer neared, Leo started writing letters, not ones he planned to send, just letters for the boy he used to be. He tucked them into a box under his bed. Each one began the same way. "Dear me, you don't know this yet, but the waiting ends." David found one left on the coffee table weeks later. He picked it up, unfolded it, and read, "Dear me, you're not broken. You're just holding space for something better. And one day, a man in a suit will walk into court thinking he's there for business, and he'll walk out with your hand in his. Don't give up before then. You're almost there." David read it twice. Then he placed it in a drawer beside his watch, his cufflinks, and a picture of him and Leo standing outside the courthouse, holding hands in front of the building that changed both of their lives. The caption, in Leo's handwriting, said, "Some people sign contracts. We signed a family." And that, David knew, was the only legacy he needed. By midsummer, the rhythm of their life had become something new. Not perfect. David still burned toast at least twice a week, and Leo still left his shoes in the middle of the hallway, no matter how many times they tripped over them. But it was theirs. It was real. The adoption paperwork had been finalized. The court documents filed and tucked safely into a folder in the desk drawer beneath utility bills and receipts and one single sticky note that read, "You said yes. Remember why." Leo had taken to introducing David as his dad in public, casually, like it had always been that way. At the grocery store, "My dad says we need 2 kinds of cereal now." At the barber, "Don't cut too much off. My dad says I look older with it long." And once, at a community picnic, when someone asked where he was from, Leo simply pointed to David and said, "Wherever he is." That night, David pretended not to cry in the laundry room. They started a new tradition on Sunday mornings, Letter Day, not just for the world, not for the mailbox or the podcast, or even the shelves at Gate 27. These letters were just for each other. One page, folded and placed on the other's breakfast plate. David's letters to Leo were often a mix of gratitude and quiet wonder. "You reminded me what mornings are supposed to feel like. I used to think silence meant peace. Now I know it can mean loneliness too. Thank you for making noise in my life. Real noise, happy noise, you." Leo's letters were simple but sharp in their clarity. "I didn't know adults got scared. You show me when you're nervous, and that helps. I trust people more because I get to watch you try. Even when you mess up, you fix it. That's what makes you real." They kept every letter. One Sunday, instead of leaving a note, Leo handed David a small envelope with a string wrapped around it. Inside was a drawing, a house with a garden, a dog that looked suspiciously like the one Leo had been hinting at for months, and 2 figures standing side by side. Both of them had stars drawn on their hands. David looked at it for a long time. "You gave me the first star," Leo said. "Remember?" "I do." "I think it's mine to give now." David folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket, the same one he'd worn to court the day everything changed. That week they went back to the courthouse. not for any legal reason, just to see it again. Leo stood on the steps and looked up. "It looks smaller," he said. David smiled. "You got taller." Leo pulled something from his backpack, a letter already folded, with the words, "To the next kid who waits here," written in thick marker on the front. He didn't ask permission, just walked inside, spoke to the woman at the front desk, and asked if they had a spot for it. She read the envelope. Then her eyes softened. "We'll make room," she said. They left without ceremony, but something had been left behind. An echo, a seed, a piece of Leo's waiting, rewritten into something better. That evening, Leo fell asleep early on the couch, curled into a blanket, one arm over his face. David turned off the TV, pulled the blanket tighter, and sat beside him. And he thought about everything he almost missed, all the things he used to chase, the deals, the leverage, the controlled, sterile perfection of a life built in skyscrapers and contracts. Now, his legacy was a boy with sneakers that blinked, a laugh that filled every empty room, and a way of seeing the world that softened sharp things. He whispered, "You found me too, kid." Leo didn't stir, but his hand twitched beneath the blanket, just enough for David to see the faint outline of a star still drawn on his palm. And for once, David didn't need to win anything. He'd already come home. Later that week, Leo stood at the dining room table surrounded by construction paper stickers and 3 open glue sticks, one of which had already fused itself to the tablecloth. David raised an eyebrow as he entered the room, holding a mug of coffee and watching with cautious curiosity. "Do I want to know what this is?" Leo grinned, his hands covered in smudges of marker. "It's for school. We have to do a family storyboard." David blinked. "Like a family tree?" "Sort of, but mine's a little weird." "Weird's okay." Leo shrugged. "I mean, most kids are putting up baby pictures and parents and all that. But I didn't have all that, so I'm making mine different." David sat across from him and watched as Leo carefully glued down a page from the court adoption order, next to a cutout drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands beneath a building labeled "Court, but nice now." At the top of the board, Leo had written in bold letters, "How I got picked and picked back." He looked up at David. "Is that okay?" David's throat caught. "It's perfect." Leo continued assembling the board, adding a printout of his "To the next kid who waits here" letter, a photo of Gerald the ficus, and one of their Sunday letters, copied in his messy handwriting. "You're not hard to love. You just needed someone who stayed long enough to prove it." "That one's yours," Leo said, pointing to the letter. "I want to tell the class what you wrote." David rubbed his jaw. "Think they'll understand?" Leo shrugged. "Doesn't matter. I do." The presentation happened 3 days later. David took the morning off to be there. He sat in the back of the classroom, awkward in the tiny plastic chair, knees to his chest, trying not to look too much like the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, and more like a dad who had no idea how 3rd grade worked. When Leo stood at the front of the room and began to speak, the room quieted in a way that didn't feel like pity or confusion. It felt like respect. "This is my story," Leo said. "It doesn't start with baby pictures. It starts with a deal." The class tittered. Leo smiled. "Someone went into a courthouse thinking they were going to close a business deal, but instead they opened a life one. Mine." He pointed to the picture of him and David standing outside the courthouse steps, both of them holding a certificate and a carton of ice cream. "I didn't know what family meant, but I think now it means staying, even when you don't have to." David didn't realize he was crying until the kid next to him offered him a tissue and said, "It's okay. My mom cries all the time, too." On the drive home, Leo was quiet, then asked, "Did I say too much?" David shook his head. "No, you said everything." Leo leaned back against the seat. "I think I want to write a book one day." "You should. Maybe I'll call it The Courtroom Door, or The Man Who Almost Missed Me." David laughed. "That last one's true." "Yeah," Leo said softly, "but you didn't." That night they made pancakes for dinner. Leo insisted on making David's into the shape of a tie, because you used to care about those. David made Leo's into a star. Neither looked like what they were supposed to. Both tasted perfect. Later, David found a new letter on his nightstand. Dear Dad, not every story has a hero. Some just have a person who sits beside you long enough for you to become your own. Thank you for not being scared of my quiet. Thank you for waiting with me. Thank you for choosing me, even when I didn't know how to ask. Love, the kid who used to wonder what forever meant. David folded it carefully, placed it in the drawer beside every other one. And as he turned off the light and stood at the edge of the hallway, listening to the soft hum of Leo's fan, the sound of the boys breathing beneath the blanket, he smiled. Forever wasn't loud. It wasn't declared in courtrooms or made official by papers alone. It was this: every morning they woke up still trying. Every night they fell asleep still chosen. It was the staying, and it was just getting started. Fall crept in slowly that year. The leaves on the trees outside their house began to shift from deep green to amber and gold, and Leo took to collecting the brightest ones on his walk home from school. He'd press them between books, tape them to the fridge, or leave them on David's desk with little notes like, "This one looked like the sun was stuck inside." David started keeping them in a small wooden box beside his watch drawer. He hadn't meant to collect them, but now it felt like a ritual, something small that said, "I see what you bring home. I'll keep it safe." One crisp October afternoon, Leo came home with a different kind of request. "There's this family dinner night at school," he said. "It's not mandatory or anything, but it's kind of a big deal." David glanced up from the stove. "When is it?" "Friday. You can come, right?" "Of course." Leo hesitated. "Some kids bring grandparents, or like 4 people. It's okay if it's just you and me?" David put down the spoon and knelt. "Leo, if it's you and me, that's not just. That's everything." Leo smiled, cheeks pink. "Okay, I'll tell them we're coming." That Friday, David wore the tie Leo had picked out, navy blue with tiny white stars. Leo wore a collared shirt and jeans, but insisted on keeping the light-up sneakers. "You've got to wear something that says you're still fun," he said. The gym was packed. Long tables stretched wall to wall, folded name cards, trays of cookies, paper pumpkins everywhere. David recognized a few other parents, but most were strangers. That didn't seem to bother Leo. He moved through the crowd with ease, stopping to say hi to classmates, grabbing a plate of spaghetti like he'd done this 100 times. They sat at the end of one table. Leo balanced a cookie on the edge of his plate and turned to David. "Hey," he said softly, "is it weird that this still doesn't always feel real?" David looked around. "You mean this?" Leo nodded. "Like all of it. That I have a dad, that I'm not going back." David set his fork down. "Not weird at all. Sometimes I don't believe it either." Leo looked at him. "But we still believe in it?" David nodded. "Every day." They stayed at the dinner until the lights flickered to signal the end. As they walked back to the car, Leo took David's hand without saying anything. It was rare now. He was getting older, more independent. But tonight, he reached for it on his own. In the car, Leo turned on the radio and hummed quietly. At one point he asked, "If we wrote another letter to that judge, what would it say now?" David smiled. "Maybe we should." When they got home, Leo pulled out a notebook and sat at the kitchen table. David sat beside him. Together they wrote, "Dear Judge, thank you for signing the papers. We know you probably do that a lot. But for us, it wasn't just a case. It was a beginning. Since that day, we've burned pancakes and made perfect popcorn. We've started our own mailboxes. We've learned that staying is a verb, not just a promise. This house is noisy now, not loud but full, with music and letters and drawings and silence that doesn't feel scary anymore. And every time someone asks us where our story started, we get to say, It started in a courtroom, but it never ended. Sincerely, David and Leo. They didn't mail it, they didn't need to, but they did tape a copy to the back of Leo's door, so every morning he'd see it. And every night, before bed, he'd read the last line out loud. Not for anyone else, just for himself. It never ended, because some stories don't. They just keep choosing each other. Every day, every season, every stay. Winter arrived like a held breath, cold and quiet, soft around the edges. Snow dusted the windows of their house like powdered sugar, and Leo taped paper snowflakes to the glass, each one labeled with names. Gerald for the plant, the bus driver, the neighbor's cat. David, one he left blank. That one's for whoever needs it most, he said, even if they haven't come yet. David didn't ask what he meant. He just helped him hang it. Around mid-December, Leo began asking questions again. Not the kind he used to, what if I have to leave, or what if forever runs out? But newer ones, deeper ones. He asked if people could love you even if they hadn't met the earliest versions of you. If someone could understand your heart without knowing your whole history. If staying ever got easier, or if it always had to be a choice. David told him the truth. It's always a choice, but the longer you stay, the less you have to wonder. For the holidays, they kept it simple. No huge trips, no 12-foot tree, just warmth. David taught Leo how to make French toast from scratch. Leo taught David how to fold paper stars that didn't look like sad pancakes. They watched old movies under 3 blankets, drank hot cocoa that was mostly marshmallows, and read through letters from kids who had found Gate 27 through Leo's podcast. One night, Leo opened a letter that stopped him cold. Dear Leo, I was in the courtroom last week. Same bench, same door. I thought no one saw me. Then I remembered your story. So I waited. And someone came. I think I'm going to be okay. You gave me the words to believe that. Okay? Leo folded the letter carefully, holding it in his lap like something alive. They waited, he whispered. David put a hand on his shoulder. Because you taught them how. New Year's Eve came, quiet and golden. No fireworks, no big party, just the two of them, sitting on the floor in pajamas, building a puzzle they'd started 3 weeks before. Can we make a tradition? Leo asked. David looked up. We already have a dozen. I mean one for the start of the year, something we always do. Okay? What do you want to do? Leo thought for a while. Then he said, write a letter to the kid who's still waiting. The one who's sitting on a bench, holding a bag, not sure if anyone's coming. David nodded. Let's do it. They wrote it together. Dear you, it's okay to be tired. It's okay if your hands are shaking when you pick up your bag. It's okay if you've stopped looking at doors because you're tired of being let down. You're not invisible. Someone is coming. And when they do, you don't have to believe it all at once. Just enough to take the first step. The rest will come. We'll wait with you. Love, 2 people who didn't know forever was possible, until it was. They folded it, put it in an envelope, and labeled it simply, for the next bench. Then they put on their coats, stepped into the night, and walked in silence to the courthouse. They didn't go inside. They just slipped the envelope through the slot on the information desk, where someone would find it in the morning. On the way home, Leo slipped his hand into David's. You ever think about how close we came to missing this? He asked. All the time. But we didn't. No, David said. We didn't. And somewhere behind them, in the empty hallways of a building built for order and law, a letter sat waiting. Not for justice, but for hope. Because sometimes the truest things don't come in verdicts or signatures or gavel strikes. Sometimes they arrive in a hand held a little tighter, in a voice that says, I'm still here, and a note that whispers, so are you. By mid-January, the world outside was sharp and white, the kind of cold that made sounds quieter and time feel slower. Leo had started setting his shoes by the heater before school so they'd be warm when he put them on. He did it every morning now, methodically, without saying why. David never asked. They'd fallen into a rhythm that didn't require explanation. Breakfast, school, work, home. But every Friday they added something new, a question jar. It started small, a mason jar on the kitchen counter with blank slips of paper and 2 pens. Each week they took turns pulling one and answering it. No rules, just answers, as true as they could be. The first week, Leo pulled, "What does love feel like?" He thought for a long time, then said, "Like the heater under your shoes before you go outside." David didn't answer out loud. He just wrote Leo's response on a note card and tucked it into the letterbox. The next week, David pulled, "Do you believe people change?" Leo looked at him. "I think people remember who they are when someone finally sees them. So maybe that's not changing. Maybe it's coming back." The jar filled up. So did the pages in David's journal. On a Saturday afternoon, they visited Gate 27. It had been a while since they'd both been there together. The space looked the same. Soft light, quiet chairs, letters hanging on the walls like constellations. But something felt deeper now, more lived in, more sacred. Ben was there, older now, but no less grounded. He hugged Leo like he'd known him since the beginning. Maybe he had. "We're adding a new shelf," Ben said, motioning to the corner. "Letters from the ones who made it all the way. Stories after the adoption. The staying. The ordinary stuff." Leo's eyes lit up. "Can we add ours?" "You better." They brought a few of their Sunday notes. One of Leo's, one of David's, one they'd written together. "Dear Stillness, thank you for teaching us how to fill a home without filling it with noise. Thank you for being the place where we could finally hear each other. Thank you for staying. Love." The ones who no longer wait at windows. Ben hung it that afternoon. Before they left, a girl, maybe 10, came up to Leo holding a folded letter. "Was this yours?" she asked. Leo took it, unfolded it carefully. "You're not hard to love. You just needed someone who stayed long enough to prove it." He nodded. "Yeah, that was mine." She didn't say anything else. She just smiled and put it back in the basket like it had done its job. On the way home, Leo leaned his head against the window and asked, "Do you think I'll ever stop needing reminders?" David kept his eyes on the road. "I hope not." "Why?" "Because even people who are home still like being told they belong." Leo was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm going to leave reminders for someone else then, just in case they haven't heard it yet." That night, he wrote 3 new letters. "Dear you, I know what it's like to walk through a door and not expect anyone to stay. But I hope when you read this, you feel like someone already did. Dear morning, thanks for giving me another try. I promise I'll keep showing up if you do. Dear someone else's kid, if they didn't come back, it wasn't because of you. You were never the reason someone left, but you might be the reason someone finally stays." They placed them in the New Start shelf at Gate 27 the next day. Leo didn't sign them. He didn't need to. His story was already written on the walls, in the jar on the counter, in the space beside the heater where his shoes waited to be warmed, in the hand he reached for without thinking, and in the quiet that had finally become safe enough to call home. By early February, the snow started melting in uneven patches across the front yard, exposing little corners of earth that felt like secrets waking up. Leo called them truth spots. Each time he found a new one, he'd crouch low, press his fingers to the damp soil and whisper something only the ground could hear. David never interrupted. He just watched from the porch, hands in his pockets, letting the stillness wrap around them like another kind of language. One morning, Leo woke up early and padded into the kitchen barefoot, rubbing his eyes and carrying something carefully in both hands. A shoebox, the old kind, beat up, duct-taped along one side, filled with folded letters and notes and drawings that stretched all the way back to the beginning. He placed it on the table and sat across from David. "I think it's time," he said. David looked at the box. Time for what? To give it away to someone else. David's breath caught. "Are you sure?" Leo nodded. "I don't need to carry the proof anymore. I am the proof." They didn't rush the decision. They took a week, going through every piece inside. Laughing at the misspelled ones, tearing up at the early ones, tracing old sentences with new hands. There were notes written in anger, hope, confusion, loneliness, joy. There were lists of questions Leo used to ask when he couldn't sleep, and drawings of houses he used to invent in his head before he knew what one felt like. In the bottom of the box was a crumpled note, one neither of them had seen in a long time. "Do you think I'll ever be someone's favorite? Like the reason someone smiles without even thinking about it?" David read it slowly, then reached across the table and rested a hand on Leo's shoulder. "You've been mine for a long time." Leo didn't answer. He didn't have to. Later that night, they brought the box to gate 27. Ben was waiting for them with a space already cleared on the middle shelf, between letters that waited too long and letters that changed everything. Leo handed it over. Ben looked at the box, then at him. "You sure?" Leo smiled. This story started with a question. Someone else might need it now. They labeled it The Box of Becoming. Inside the lid, in Leo's handwriting, "This isn't where I lived. It's where I became someone worth staying for. Take a letter if you need it. Add your own when you're ready." That night, back home, David found a new note on his pillow. Not in the old handwriting. New, steady. "Dear Dad, I don't wonder anymore if you're going to stay. Now I wonder how I'll learn to do the same for someone else. Don't worry. I've been watching you. Love, your favorite, because you said so." David folded it once, tucked it into his wallet behind his ID, and thought, "There's nothing else I ever need to carry." From then on, Leo stopped collecting letters. He started collecting stories. Not the ones on paper, the ones in people. Every time he met someone new at gate 27, he'd ask the same question. "Where did it begin for you?" He never told them his answer, but he kept it close. Because for him, it began in a courtroom with a man who thought he was just signing a deal. It began with a paper-bagged lunch and a note pinned to his chest. It began with someone who didn't plan to stay and stayed anyway. And it never ended. By the time spring finally unfolded in full, sunlight stretching longer into the evenings, daffodils sprouting along the bookstore fence, Leo had outgrown his light-up sneakers. He didn't say it, but David noticed the way he still tried to squeeze into them every now and then, like there was something comforting in the flash of their soles when he walked across the kitchen. Eventually, David bought him a new pair, navy blue, simple, no lights, just sturdy and quiet, the way Leo had become. They spent more time outside now, walks after dinner, slow mornings on the porch. Letters were still written, still read, but less like lifelines and more like conversation. There was less "please hear me" and more "I've been listening too." One afternoon, Leo sat on the front steps with a notebook in his lap and said, "I think I'm ready to visit the other place." David didn't need to ask what he meant. The shelter. The one Leo had waited in, the one he used to call the maybe house. They drove there on a Tuesday. No fanfare, no donation boxes or announcements. Just the two of them, a bag of letters, and a tray of brownies Leo had made the night before. When they arrived, the director, a woman with kind eyes and tired shoulders, welcomed them like old friends. Leo hadn't been back since the day he left with David's hand in his. The room looked smaller now, the chairs lower, the light more yellow than he remembered. But some things hadn't changed. The soft murmur of cartoons in the background, the sound of a kid bouncing a ball against the wall, the silence that always stretched a little longer in places where kids weren't sure if they were staying. Leo walked slowly through the room, then sat on the same bench he once waited on. David stood behind him, giving space. A little boy sat nearby with a backpack too big for his frame. Leo looked over and offered him a brownie. "You knew?" he asked. The boy nodded. Leo smiled. "I was here once too. This bench used to feel like it was swallowing me." The boy looked confused, but he smiled back. "You look fine now." "I am," Leo said, but it took a while. From the bag, he pulled out a stack of printed letters, ones he'd written over the years, carefully chosen, folded and tied with string. He handed them to the director. "For the next kids, the ones who don't know yet." She took them with both hands, eyes wet. "You want us to read them?" "I want them to feel found," Leo said, "even if it takes a little longer." They left quietly. In the car, Leo stared out the window for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't feel scared going back." David nodded. "That's how you know it doesn't hold you anymore." That night, Leo added a new card to their Friday jar. Not a question this time, just a sentence. "What would you say to the version of you who almost gave up?" They didn't answer it right away. They folded it and put it back for later. A week passed. Then one night, long after dinner, David found the card on his pillow. On the back, in Leo's writing, "I'd say, you're not too much. You were just waiting for someone with arms strong enough to carry the story. He's here now, and he's not putting it down." David read it twice. Then he wrote his own underneath it. "I'd say, you were never alone, and I was always looking for you. I just didn't know your name yet." He left it on Leo's pillow. The next morning, nothing was said. But when David picked up his briefcase to leave for work, he found a drawing tucked inside. 2 stick figures, one small, one tall, and between them the words, "We didn't meet by accident. We were the answer to a question neither of us knew how to ask." And for David, who had once built a life out of contracts and signatures, there was no signature more permanent than that. A few weeks later, as spring leaned fully into itself and the wind carried the scent of rain and something blooming just out of sight, Leo stood in the middle of the kitchen, holding a piece of paper in both hands like it was heavier than it looked. David, mid-stir in a pot of pasta, turned at the sound of footsteps and saw the look on Leo's face. Not sad, not scared, just still. "I think I want to find him," Leo said quietly. "My first dad." David didn't speak at first. He turned the burner down, wiped his hands on a towel, and came to sit at the table. "Okay," he said. "We can talk about that." Leo nodded, slowly folding the paper. "Not because I miss him. I don't know if I do, but I think I want to know who didn't stay, so I can stop wondering if it was me." David's throat went tight. "It wasn't you." Leo gave a tiny smile. "I know. You told me enough times that I finally believe it. But there's still something unfinished." David reached across the table and rested his hand on Leo's. "Then let's finish it." They didn't rush. They started with a name, then a file, then a letter, one that Leo wrote but never sent. "Dear you, I don't need anything from you. Not answers, not sorries. But I think I need to say, I grew up without you, and I didn't break. You didn't stay, but someone else did, and because of that, I did too." He tucked it into an envelope, sealed it, and left it on the shelf in his room labeled, "Not for sending, just for letting go." That weekend, Leo and David took a drive, not to chase the past, but to mark that they were no longer afraid of it. They stopped in a small town where Leo had once spent 2 weeks in a temporary home. The family had moved. The house was empty, but the mailbox was still there, crooked and rusted. Leo placed a letter inside. "Dear house, I cried in your hallway and didn't tell anyone. But I also found a flashlight in the closet and pretended it was a sword. So thank you. You held both of those things for me." They drove home in silence, the windows down, the air thick with peace. That night Leo asked if they could light a candle. "For who?" David asked. "For me," Leo said. "For the boy I used to be. He deserves to know we made it." They sat on the porch while the candle burned low. Gerald the ficus had new leaves. The wind picked up. Somewhere a dog barked in the distance. "I think I want to be the one who stays," Leo said. "For other people." "You already are," David replied. Leo leaned his head on David's shoulder. Do you still remember the first time you saw me? I remember everything, David said. I don't remember what you looked like, just that you didn't keep walking. That's all I needed to do. Leo was quiet. Then he said, When I grow up, I want someone to say that about me. They will, David said. They already do. And in the stillness of the porch, with spring buzzing in the air and years behind them they no longer feared, Leo smiled. Not the smile of a child wondering if he was wanted, but the smile of someone who knew, without question, he was worth staying for. In late spring, just as the first real warmth settled into the sidewalks and the trees filled out in full green, Leo brought home a school assignment titled Legacy Week. He handed it to David across the kitchen table along with a form clipped to the back. They want us to talk about where we come from, Leo said, and where we think we're going. David read the assignment carefully. You want to do it? Leo shrugged. Yeah, but I don't want to write about what's missing. I want to write about what showed up. David set the paper down. Then we'll tell that story. That week, Leo worked on a project that didn't start with a family tree, but with a door. He drew it himself, a tall wooden door, open just a little, with light spilling through the crack. Above it, in block letters, he wrote, Where it started to matter. Beneath the door, he listed moments instead of names. The bench outside the courtroom, the tie with the little white stars, the shoes that lit up when I still needed to be noticed, the letter I never had to send, the pancakes that came out burned but were still eaten, the day the silence didn't win. David watched as Leo shaped a history not out of bloodlines but of touchstones, the people who stayed, the places that held him, the version of himself that survived until he could grow. On presentation day, David sat in the back of the classroom again, knees still too long for the tiny plastic chair, heart too full to speak. When it was Leo's turn, he stood up with steady hands and unrolled his project across the whiteboard. This is my legacy, he said. It didn't start with the people who made me. It started with the people who kept me. He looked over at David. This is my dad, he added. He's the reason my story doesn't have to be a rescue story. It's just a choosing story. And we both said yes. The room went still. Then came applause, soft, sincere. That night back home, they didn't talk about the presentation. They didn't need to. Instead, they sat on the porch again, the same porch where they'd weathered questions, seasons, quiet. Leo leaned his head back against the chair and said, Do you ever wonder how many kids are still waiting in courtrooms? David nodded. Every day. Leo took a breath. I want to go back again, not as the kid waiting this time, as the one who's proof. 2 weeks later, with the help of the director from Gate 27 and a few quiet approvals, they returned to the courthouse. Leo walked into the juvenile wing with a stack of letters tucked under one arm. David carried the rest in a box marked Letters for the Ones Still Wondering. They met with staff, judges, clerks, no cameras, no headlines, just conversations. And a bench in the hallway. Leo sat there for a moment, running his hand along the worn wood. Then he stood and placed a letter beneath it. Dear you, I know this hallway. I know the weight of wondering who will walk through the door. I know the ache of silence and the pretend bravery. But I also know what it feels like to be found. So if no one has told you yet, you are worth walking toward. We see you. We're already on the way. He didn't sign it, but he did leave a drawing, a small, simple door just slightly open, light spilling out from behind it. As they left the building, David put his hand on Leo's back. You okay? Leo smiled. I think I just became the person I used to need. David swallowed against the lump in his throat. And as they stepped outside into the late spring light, it felt less like the end of something and more like the beginning of a legacy that had nothing to do with names and everything to do with what happens when someone finally stays. And then keeps staying. A few weeks into June, The summer heat settled gently across the city, the kind that made you move a little slower and notice things you usually passed by. Leo started waking up early, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He liked the quiet before the day began, the way the house felt like it was stretching too, reaching out across the walls and windows as if it had learned to breathe alongside him. One morning, he sat at the kitchen table with his cereal, sunlight cutting across the floor. David walked in, still groggy, and Leo pushed a folded letter across the table. "I wrote this last night," he said. "It's not for the wall." David picked it up carefully and opened it. "Dear me, you're not a project anymore. You're a person, and you're allowed to outgrow your pain without needing to explain why it took so long. You don't owe anyone the shape of your sadness. You only owe yourself the chance to live fully in the light. I think you're ready. Love, the version of you who made it." David looked up and Leo was already smiling. "I think I'm done writing to the old me." David nodded. "Then maybe it's time to start writing to who you're becoming." That afternoon, they returned to Gate 27 with a small stack of new cards. These ones were blank on the front, but on the back Leo had written just 5 words. "Write to your future self." They placed them in a new basket beside the door. The first visitor that day, a teenager in a denim jacket with bitten fingernails, sat by the window for almost an hour before writing something. She didn't read it aloud. She didn't ask for help. But when she dropped the card in the box, she whispered one word before leaving. Finally, Leo heard it. That evening, he added a new shelf to the back of the shop, not for letters or books, for photographs. He printed pictures of kids who had come through, those who had stayed in touch, those who had come back to visit, those who had once said they didn't believe in forever, but were now building it one piece at a time. At the top of the shelf, he placed a single frame with no photo inside, just a label, "You, when you're ready." He looked at David and said, "Some people don't know they're part of the story yet, but they are." David put an arm around his shoulder. "You're still part of mine." Leo leaned in. "We're not even close to the last chapter." A week later, they took a trip, not far, just out of town, to a community center that had recently opened their own version of Gate 27. They called it Threshold. The room was smaller, brighter, walls painted soft green. Instead of letters on a wall, they hung them from strings across the ceiling, like prayers in motion. Leo walked through slowly, reading as many as he could. One caught his eye. "I haven't spoken in 2 days, but I read this aloud to myself, and it felt like my voice was trying to come back." He placed a copy of one of his own letters next to it, not as a replacement, just a reply. On the drive home, Leo stared out the window and said, "Do you think some kids only need one person, like just one moment of being seen?" David kept his eyes on the road. "Sometimes that's all it takes. One hand held long enough, one word spoken at the right time." Leo smiled. "Then I want to be that moment for someone else." "You already have been." They pulled into the driveway just as the porch light flicked on. Gerald, still thriving in his corner, leaned a little farther toward the sun. Leo opened the mailbox and pulled out a single envelope, handwritten, no stamp. Inside, "Dear whoever finds this, today I realized I want to stay. Not because I have to, but because someone taught me how." Leo handed it to David without saying anything. They left it on the kitchen table. No need to frame it, no need to share it yet. That night, Leo stood in his doorway and asked, "What do you think the last line of our story will be?" David thought for a second. "I hope we never write it." Leo nodded. "Yeah, me too." Then he turned off the light, climbed into bed, and dreamed not about the boy who once waited on a bench with a paper bag in his lap, but about the one who knew how to leave a door open, just wide enough for the next kid coming through. And across town, somewhere else, someone was already walking toward it. July arrived in full bloom, long days that stretched lazily into pink-orange evenings, cicadas humming like background music no one asked for but somehow needed. Leo had begun taking more walks on his own, always returning just before dinner, cheeks flushed and notebook in hand. He didn't talk about what he was writing now, not because he was hiding it, but because he was learning how to let things grow in silence first. One night, he returned home with a folded flyer. He placed it on the counter beside David's glass of water and said, "They're starting a mentorship group for kids who aged out but didn't find anything steady." David scanned the paper. It was simple, local, underfunded. Leo said, "I think I want to go." David raised an eyebrow. "To join?" Leo shook his head. "To help." That Saturday, they showed up to a small community center tucked between two laundromats. In a circle of folding chairs and a stack of boxed pizzas greeted them. The group was small, 6 teens, 1 coordinator, and now Leo, who walked in like he'd been invited even though no one had sent him a formal message. He introduced himself the only way he knew how, with honesty. "I don't know how to fix anything," he said, "but I know what it feels like to be sitting in this circle and not know where to begin. So, if you just want someone who gets it, I'm here." They didn't clap. They didn't speak. But one girl, arms folded tight across her chest, blinked like someone had nudged the door open just a little wider. By the end of the night, Leo had offered his phone number to 2 of them. He didn't push. He just said, "If you ever need someone to walk you through a form, or find a ride, or remind you you're not broken, I can do that." When they got back to the car, David didn't ask questions. He just said, "Proud of you." Leo looked out the window. "I think I finally understand what the staying means." David smiled. "What does it mean?" "It's not just showing up once. It's showing up again, and again, and again." That week, Leo added a new section to Gate 27. He called it the Second Circle. It wasn't for first-time visitors. It was for the ones who had made it out, but hadn't figured out what comes after. On the wall above it, he painted a sentence. "Some of us didn't get a soft beginning, so we build a softer middle." People started leaving different kinds of letters there. Not desperation, not survival, but rebuilding, trying again, forgiving themselves. One letter read, "I haven't figured out how to believe people when they're kind, but I'm trying. And that counts now. I decided it does." Another said, "I got a job. I bought myself a winter coat. It has deep pockets and a zipper that works. That's the first time in years I've been warm on purpose." Leo read them all. Then he wrote one of his own. "Dear you, I know what it's like to think you only get one shot at being okay. You don't. This is your second circle. There's room. We saved your seat." He taped it to the wall and stepped back, watching the letters flutter in the air-conditioned breeze. That night, back home, David found Leo sitting on the floor of his room, surrounded by postcards. "Planning a trip?" David asked. Leo grinned. "Sort of." He held up one card that simply read, "If you find this, it means someone like you once made it through. Now it's your turn. Keep going." He explained the plan. Drop them off, quietly, at bus stations, at courthouse waiting rooms, inside library books and under food court trays. "Little reminders," Leo said, "in places people forget to look for them." David sat beside him. "Need help hiding them?" Leo smiled. "I always want you next to me." So they did it together. Postcards slipped into places forgotten and found. Each one a spark, each one a breadcrumb for the next kid trying to find the path. Not to rescue, not to escape, but to a soft second beginning. And all along that invisible trail, one quiet truth whispered from paper to hand to heart. Someone stayed. Now it's your turn. August rolled in warm and golden, the sky stretching wide above them like a held breath. The streets were quieter now, summer camps winding down, family squeezing in last road trips, the edges of the season softening into something reflective. Gate 27 stayed open late. Visitors lingered longer. Leo started leaving out cups of iced tea on the back counter with a handwritten sign. Help yourself. The world is a lot. One Sunday evening, Leo stood in the middle of the bookstore, eyes scanning the shelves as if searching for something that wasn't quite there. David walked in from the back, drying his hands on a towel. "What are you thinking?" Leo hesitated. Then, "I want to teach someone how to run this." David raised an eyebrow. "The whole thing?" "Eventually, yeah. Not because I'm leaving," he added quickly, "but because it shouldn't need me to survive. The bench, the letters, the door, they should outlive us." David leaned against the counter. "You already built something that stays. Now you want to build something that keeps going." Leo nodded. That week they posted a sign near the entrance. Apprentices wanted. No experience necessary, just a story, and a heart that knows what it means to wait. The responses trickled in, at first just curiosity, then something deeper. Letters, emails. One girl came in holding a folder of drawings she'd made after reading a Gate 27 letter online. A boy arrived with nothing but a journal full of songs he wrote when he couldn't sleep. One of them was titled, "Please Stay Long Enough to Know Me." Leo met with each of them, not interviews, just conversations. Questions like, when did you first realize you weren't invisible? What would you say to the version of yourself that almost gave up? How do you know someone is safe? By the end of the month, he had 3 apprentices, different ages, different stories, all of them familiar in that way. Pain recognizes itself in others, not as pity, but as understanding. He started showing them the rhythms, how to sort the letters, how to feel when someone needed silence more than advice, how to answer a question without fixing the asker, how to leave a chair empty because some people need to choose it for themselves. One afternoon he handed them each a copy of the first letter he ever left in Gate 27. If you're reading this, then maybe you're still here. Maybe you woke up today and didn't know what to do next. That's okay. You already did the hardest part. You stayed. They read in silence. One of them, Sammy, a boy with quiet eyes and a nervous energy he carried in his sleeves, asked, "Can we write our own?" Leo smiled. "That's the idea." They did. Each one added their letter to the growing new shelf, for the ones who will run this next. Leo stood in front of it one night long after closing, the room dim, the letters gently swaying with the breeze of the ceiling fan. David came in beside him. "You proud?" "I am," Leo said, "but I'm also scared." "Of what?" "Of being done." David rested a hand on his shoulder. "You're not done. You're evolving." Leo looked up. "What if I want to write something new, a book, a play, something that isn't just about the pain?" "Then write it," David said. "No one said you had to stay where you started." That night, Leo sat in his room and opened a fresh notebook. On the first page, he wrote, Chapter 1, The Boy Who Thought He Was a Bench, and became the door instead. And under it, this isn't a story about being saved. It's a story about what happens when someone finally says, "You can come in now. I left the light on." He didn't know where the story would go, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't writing to be found. He was writing to show someone else the way, because now the staying was steady, and the future? The future was opening like a door with no lock, just a handle and a welcome.